Bajirao Singham was more than just a police officer. He was the embodiment of justice in a town where corruption had seeped into every corner. His presence commanded respect, not through fear, but through an unshakable commitment to the truth. The people of the town saw him as their last hope, the only man who could stand against those who abused power. One evening, as Singham reviewed case files in his modest office, a well-dressed man entered, his face lined with worry. He introduced himself as Mahesh Sharma, a businessman whose life had been turned upside down. His voice trembled as he spoke, describing how the town was under the thumb of a ruthless politician named Raghav Thakur. Thakur and his men operated above the law, silencing anyone who dared to oppose them. Sharma's own business had been threatened, his employees beaten, and his pleas for help ignored by the authorities. Singham listened intently, his fingers tightening into a fist under the desk. He had always known corruption existed, but hearing it from a man who had suffered firsthand made it personal. He assured Sharma that justice would be served and promised to investigate. Later that night, as Singham walked through the town, a black SUV screeched to a halt beside him. The tinted window rolled down just enough to reveal a pair of cold, calculating eyes. A deep voice warned him to back off, to forget everything Sharma had told him. The car sped away, leaving behind only the lingering smell of cigarette smoke. Singham wasn't one to be intimidated. He returned to the station and pulled out old case files, cross-referencing complaints against Thakur. Most reports had been dismissed without investigation, buried under bureaucracy. It was clear Thakur had informants everywhere, including inside the department. The next day, Singham visited the market, where small shopkeepers whispered stories of extortion and violence. Fear hung in the air like a thick fog. An elderly fruit vendor hesitated before speaking. "Sahab, they take money from us every week. Those who refuse disappear." His voice cracked, eyes darting around nervously. Before Singham could respond, a group of men arrived, collecting protection fees. One of them, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, noticed Singham and smirked. "Officer, you should be careful. Meddling in the wrong business can be dangerous." Without warning, he grabbed a young vendor by the collar, shaking him violently. Singham moved fast. In one swift motion, he twisted the thug's arm behind his back, forcing him to the ground. The market fell silent. The other men hesitated, but didn't dare fight back. Singham let the thug go, his voice low but firm. "Tell your boss his rule is ending." That night, another message arrived. A brick crashed through Singham's window, a note attached, "Leave, or face the consequences." Singham read it, then tore it in half. The battle had begun. Singham returned to duty the next day, his body aching from the beating, but his resolve stronger than ever. The town needed justice, and he wouldn't let fear dictate his actions. He knew Thakur expected him to retreat, to accept defeat like so many before him. But Singham wasn't like the others. He started working in silence, gathering intelligence from informants who operated in the shadows. Late at night, he pored over financial records, searching for cracks in Thakur's empire. It wasn't long before he found one, a former gang member who had fallen out of favor and had been living in hiding. Tracking him down took time, but when Singham finally cornered him, the man was terrified. "If they find out I talked to you, I'm dead." "They'll find out anyway," Singham said. "Unless you help me take them down first." Fear flickered in the man's eyes, but he nodded. He spoke of secret bank accounts, bribed officials, and locations where Thakur's men stored weapons and cash. But the most important detail was something else: proof. A hidden hard drive containing records of every deal, every payoff, every crime Thakur had orchestrated. Singham wasted no time. With a small team of trusted officers, he raided the warehouse where the drive was kept. The place was heavily guarded, but Singham moved with precision, taking down the sentries one by one. When he finally retrieved the drive, he knew it was the key to ending Thakur's reign. But Thakur was always a step ahead. That same night, as Singham was preparing to send the evidence to higher authorities, an urgent call came in. A family had been kidnapped, one Singham knew personally. The kidnappers left a clear message: hand over the hard drive or watch them die. Singham clenched his fists. He could hear the fear in the mother's voice over the phone, the muffled cries of her children. Thakur was using innocent lives as leverage, forcing Singham into an impossible choice. His team urged caution, but Singham had already made his decision. He wasn't going to negotiate with criminals. He was going to finish this. As dawn approached, Singham prepared for war. He armed himself, knowing Thakur's men would be waiting. Every step he took toward the abandoned factory where the hostages were held felt heavier, but his mind was clear. He wasn't walking into a trap, he was setting one. The moment he arrived, the air filled with tension. Thakur's men lined the area, weapons drawn. And there, at the center, stood Thakur himself, smiling. "You have something that belongs to me, officer." Singham held up the hard drive. "And you have something that doesn't belong to you?" Thakur chuckled. "Then let's make a trade." Singham's grip tightened.
"No."
"Let's end this." The fight was about to begin, and Singham knew only one of them would walk away victorious. The tension in the air was suffocating. Singham stood firm, his eyes locked onto Thakur, who smirked with the confidence of a man who had always controlled the game. His men surrounded the area, their fingers hovering over the triggers of their guns. The kidnapped family sat huddled in the corner, bound and terrified. Singham knew he was outnumbered, but he also knew fear was Thakur's greatest weapon. And today, Singham refused to give him that power. Thakur took a step forward. "You're alone, Singham. Do you really think you can win?" Singham didn't answer. Instead, he tossed the hard drive onto the ground between them. Thakur raised an eyebrow, signaling one of his men to pick it up. The second the thug bent down, Singham moved. With lightning speed, he grabbed the nearest goon, using him as a shield as the first bullets rang out. Chaos erupted. Singham disarmed one attacker, using the stolen gun to take down two more. The factory turned into a battlefield, echoes of gunfire and screams bouncing off the walls. Thakur stepped back, watching as his men fell one by one. He had underestimated Singham. The hostages were still in danger. Amidst the chaos, Singham spotted a thug approaching them with a knife. Without hesitation, he lunged, knocking the man unconscious with a brutal strike. The mother sobbed in relief as he freed them. "Stay down," he ordered before turning back to the fight. Only a handful of Thakur's men remained, but they were desperate, firing wildly. Singham dodged, using the environment to his advantage. He leaped over crates, took cover behind steel beams, and dismantled them with ruthless efficiency. Soon, only Thakur was left. He stumbled back, rage flashing in his eyes. "You think you're some hero, Singham?" he spat. "You think people like me can just be erased?" Singham walked toward him, calm and unshaken. "Not erased. Just brought to justice." Thakur pulled out a gun, his hands shaking. "You won't win. You're just one man." Singham didn't flinch. "That's all it takes." Before Thakur could react, Singham struck, disarming him with a single blow. The gun clattered to the floor as Thakur collapsed, gasping for breath. Singham grabbed him by the collar, dragging him outside where police sirens wailed in the distance. "You wanted power," Singham said, his voice firm. "Now you'll see what real power looks like." The authorities arrived, their eyes widening at the scene. Thakur, beaten and defeated, his empire crumbling before him. Singham stepped back as the officers cuffed Thakur, his reign of terror finally over. The town had suffered for too long. Tonight, justice had been served. The streets were alive with whispers. News of Thakur's downfall spread like wildfire, and for the first time in years, the town felt a sense of relief. The man who had ruled with fear now sat behind bars, stripped of his power, his influence crumbling by the hour. His corrupt allies scrambled to save themselves, but with the hard drive and evidence and witness testimonies flooding in, there was no escape. Singham watched from the sidelines, his job far from over. Paperwork, court proceedings, and bureaucratic red tape still stood between justice and closure. But the most important battle had been won. The people who had once lived in fear now walked with their heads held high. Shopkeepers reopened their businesses without the weight of extortion, and families who had suffered in silence finally found their voices. Despite the victory, Singham remained vigilant. Corruption didn't vanish overnight, and power-hungry men would always try to rise from the shadows. But today, the town had seen what courage could do. Today, they had learned that fear was not invincible. The commissioner, the same man who had once urged Singham to step back, now stood before him with an official letter in hand. "You've done what no one else dared to do," he admitted, handing over Singham's reinstatement. Singham took it without a word. His duty had never been about ranks or recognition. He had done what needed to be done, because no one else would. As he stepped outside the station, a small group of townspeople gathered. Among them was the elderly fruit vendor, his wrinkled face breaking into a smile. "You kept your word, Sahib." Singham simply nodded. Actions had always meant more than words. Across the street, Arjun leaned against his car, still bandaged but grinning. "I'm writing the biggest story of my career," he said. "And you're the headline." Singham smirked. "Write about the people. They're the real story." Arjun shook his head. "Maybe. But today, they needed a hero." The town was changing, but Singham knew his work was never truly done. As he walked down the road, past the once oppressed shopkeepers, past the children who no longer had to hide in fear, he knew another battle would come. Another villain would rise.